Hi there, and welcome to this presentation on textbooks and other types of teaching materials. Here I will start by talking a bit about the place of textbooks and teaching materials in language education. Then I will go on to talk about different types of teaching materials. And finally, I will say a few words about how one should and how one shouldn't use textbooks and teaching materials in English as a foreign language teaching and learning. Starting with the place of teaching materials in education. First of all, it's important to keep in mind the focus on learning outcomes. And research has shown that a lot of teaching in Norwegian schools is activity focused rather than learning focused. So it means that many teachers are happy as long as they see the pupils doing something, rather than thinking about, do they actually learn something from this? And we also know that a great number of teachers use textbooks when planning their teaching, which can be a good thing, of course, but it can also have some disadvantages if teachers become too dependent on the textbooks. And this relates in the Norwegian context to the problem of operationalizing competence aims. This means that as you know, in the Norwegian context, many of the competence aims of the subject curriculum are rather overall. They are very general, so they need to be made concrete in order to put them to use in the classroom, in order for us to use them with our pupils. And this is something many teachers find difficult. And I will return to ways of doing this concretely in a little while. When we talk about learning outcomes, it's important to keep the focus on learning and not on activity. And I think here it's relevant to use Ramaprasad's model of teaching and learning, as we've talked about before. And keeping in mind that the knowledge promotion, Kunnskapsløftet, does not say anything about teaching materials. It is, as you know, the competence aims which decide. And this is where learning goals are important. Learning goals are ways of operationalizing the competence aims. And I will shortly show you an example. So in this case, then the focus should not be on activity, but it should be on learning. And here is where Ramaprasad comes in. Ramaprasad talks about the importance of identifying the goal, what are the pupils supposed to learn, trying to identify the pupil's current level, and on the basis of the level and the goal, choose suitable teaching materials and teaching methods. To make this concrete, I'm quite sure that many of you are good at making learning goals out of the competence aims, but since we know from research that some teachers struggle with this, I just want to show an example. And this is something I just found randomly at the internet. You can check it. You can check it yourself, clicking into the source there. You can see the competence aims here in the top right square. Bruke enkle lytte- og lesestrategier, talestrategier, forstå hovedinnholdet, rim, regler, sanger, eventyr, fortellinger, etc., etc. And then making these concrete, operationalizing these competence aims in læringsmål. Where's the cursor? There it is. Jeg kan telle til 100 på engelsk. Jeg kan telle på engelsk med 10 om gangen til 100. Jeg kan si på engelsk hva jeg liker og ikke liker å spise. Jeg vet at dette personlig pronomen, etc., etc. You don't have to make these specific learning goals, but the good thing about these is that they're very concrete, they're easy to manage and to present to pupils. So, as you already know, there are different types of teaching materials, and there are ways of classifying them, different ways of classifying them. Here I've chosen something from Tomlinson. And Tomlinson distinguishes between teaching materials that are instructional, in that they inform learners about the language. Can inform learners about grammar, for example, such as you can see in the worksheet here, the worksheet on WH questions. Inform the teachers about the fact that there are WH questions, such as who and what and why and how. Secondly, Tomlinson says, some materials are experiential, in that they provide exposure to the language in use. Unfortunately, you cannot see that here, but there are some explanation to the different WH words here in English that are authentic English language. And these phrases and sentences, they provide the pupils with exposure to the language in use. Thirdly, Tomlinson says, teaching materials can be elicitative, in that they stimulate language use. To elicit means to get out of, or to get from, or to make something, to produce something. So some teaching materials stimulate pupils to use language, to speak and to write. And finally, there are teaching materials that are exploratory, in that they facilitate, to make easier, discoveries about language use. So it can help pupils discover the language for themselves. And this is a way of thinking about teaching materials that can be important for us as teachers when we are to pick the right or the most appropriate teaching materials for the goals that we want the pupils to reach. Right, now let's go on to textbooks. Here I have chosen, sorry about the frame there. I've chosen an example from a textbook from 1948, and I think it's wonderful because it shows very well the difference between teaching methods of the past and what we do today. And here you can actually see the use of phonemic transcription in a textbook used for pupils. So back in the 40s, very much based on the natural method of teaching, there was this focus on, first of all, oral communication, focus on spoken language, and the importance of pronunciation. So pupils were in fact expected to learn how to read transcribed English. And if you look at this, you will be able to understand most of it because it's very similar to what you are doing. There are some minor differences, differences between the phonemic transcription that we use today and what was used then. But you will in fact be able to read this, I think. And now you can see how it goes. It starts with the number of the text, 2A. Questions and answer. And then the teacher speaks. Teacher, colon. This is the teacher speaking. I am a person. And then to Frank. He's speaking to Frank. You are a person. What are you, Frank? And then Frank is supposed to speak. And Frank is saying nothing. And then the teacher speaks again. Teacher. Yes, you and I are persons. What are you? What are you and I, Evelyn? Evelyn doesn't say anything. Teacher, you and I, you are right. We are persons. I think it's fantastic. And as you can see, most of this is similar to what you're doing today. One difference would be the sound in person. This would be written differently in phonemic transcription today. You would have the letter like the almost like the number 3 with 2 dots. That would be in phonemic transcription today. But apart from that, it's very, very similar. And also, as you can see, quite interesting, because today there is a lot of focus on having authentic texts for pupils. And as you can see, this is really far from being authentic. I mean, nobody would speak like this. The teacher saying, I am a person. And to Frank, you are a person. What are you, Frank? And yes, you and I are persons. This is completely constructed language. But a very interesting example, I think, of a textbook from the past. So, as I touched upon previously, there are advantages and there are disadvantages of textbooks. One of the advantages of a textbook is, of course, as you probably already know, that they reduce the time needed for preparation. Also, textbooks usually contain a lot of extra material, which are very nice to draw on when we teach English. And also, textbooks are typically accompanied by workbooks and online resources, which can also be wonderful. And fourthly, they make it possible to standardize instruction. If all the teachers at the same year level use the same textbook, it's easier to standardize teaching, and it will be easier for teachers to help each other out, swapping classes, for example. If one teacher gets ill and another teacher has to substitute, that's not that difficult if you're using the same textbook. And as McGraw has said, they are very often visually appealing, and well, that could be used as an argument. But as I've also touched upon, there are some disadvantages. And first, I would say one of the disadvantages, perhaps the major disadvantage, is that they may make the teacher lose the focus on learning. I've been out in practice, I've looked at teachers, I've seen how they focus on, pupils doing tasks, and once they start doing tasks, the teacher is happy without sort of thinking, do they really need to do these tasks? Perhaps they master this type of problem or activity already. So the first bullet point here is then related to the second one, that the textbook may cause a too strong focus on activity. And relatedly, they may become the easy option. Okay, let's check the textbook. There are some tasks there we can do, rather than thinking about where are they in their learning process and where are they going. Also, there's the fact that not books are equally good. There are some textbooks out there which aren't that helpful for promoting good learning outcomes. And also, as we've seen in many instances, the last bullet point there, they may make the teachers go too fast through the different parts of the book, because some teachers have this notion that they have to cover everything in the book. This was something that is still hanging with us from earlier times, when we had a content syllabus where there was content that we needed to go through. Today there is no longer content syllabuses in Norway. We have competence aims of the subject curriculum instead. So how can we use the textbook? Well, there are some different notions of how not to use the textbook, and one piece of advice is not to read and translate the texts into Norwegian. Teachers reading and translating makes it too passive for the pupils. Also, it's not a good idea to read texts, drill vocabulary, and then do all the exercises in the workbook. not usually a very good option. Thirdly, it's neither a good idea to read texts, do the exercises, and have your class take the ready-made tests in the teacher's guide. That becomes too mechanical, and very often it gets tedious just to following in this sort of manner. Rather, when using a textbook, it's a very good idea for the teacher to get to know and to get to enjoy the material. Read the text through, read through the different fact sheets and boxes and questions and exercises for the pupils to get to know the material. And in that respect, it's also relevant to read the teacher's guide. Moreover, it's also relevant to, of course, read through the text, the workbook and the textbook, yes. And if there's a accompanying CD, check it out. And also to browse the different online resources to see how they can be used helpfully in the classroom. Beyond that, I would like to get back to where I started today, talking about the importance of the learning goals, the importance of learning, the importance of the competence aims. So it's important that you get to know the subject curriculum, and most of you probably do already. But if you haven't, I think that's a very relevant starting point for using teaching materials. Secondly, in order to, as we've said previously, operationalize the competence aims in learning goals, it's relevant to make a proper plan, preferably a term plan, and I would also suggest to use week plans so that the pupils can get to know what they are supposed to learn. And then on the basis of that, on the basis of the subject curriculum, on the basis of the learning goals that you have operationalized, it's relevant to start sort of picking out those parts of the book that you want to use, and to find those exercises and tasks that are conducive to learning. So, sort of summing up the whole point, think about learning outcomes. What are the people supposed to learn? Where are they in their learning process? What do they need in order to get to the next level? Then I'll say a couple of words about other teaching materials. As you have seen, there are many other ways of working with teaching materials and types of teaching materials. Just to mention a few here, you have online resources, of course. We have already posted a number of links to such resources. There are flashcards and worksheets that can be really useful. There are novels, there are easy readers that can come in handy. Magazines, newspapers, journals, pamphlets and guidebooks and menus can be nice. Assembly instructions, like the one we have here. It's an old one, but sort of there are possibilities of learning through looking at such operating or assembly instructions, operating manuals. You have Christmas cards and greeting cards and invitations and many other things that you can use. The same principle goes with the types of teaching materials. Familiarize yourself with them. Think in terms of how they are conducive to learning in the process, where looking at the level where the pupils are and where they're going. Finally, I want to recapitulate a little bit on something I treated in an earlier lecture, namely learning strategies. Since there is so much research pointing to the importance of learning strategies, I really want to say something about them. because we've said now that clarifying the goal is absolutely vital, but also can be a good idea to clarify the task on the basis of the learning goal. You're going to learn to count to 100. What kind of learning tasks will be useful? Okay, we're going to do this or that task, or we're going to learn the days of the week, sing the days of the week song. Let the pupils work with the task and end with a reflective summing up. So from early on, teach the pupils or help the pupils start thinking in terms of reflecting on goals, reflecting on tasks. What is helpful for me? What was the goal? What did we do? Have we reached a goal? Did you like the task? Was it useful? And with the smallest pupils, you can start with the smile list. Did you like the task? Yes. Not very much. Not at all. And then as they grow, you can go on to, was the task useful? Did you learn anything? What was good? What was bad about it? And then as they grow older, let them start to decide for themselves. There is a lot of research now on self-regulated learning as a very useful strategy for making the pupils learn more. And also, as has been shown in research, one of the competences needed in the future is probably going to be metacognitive skills and learning strategies. Because everything changes so fast, we all have to learn new things all the time, and the best ones are those who think reflectively on how they're going to learn and who know which strategies to use. And that's why I think this is very important. Okay, that's all I wanted to say. You can also find the references in the PowerPoint that I will post in Canvas. Thank you very much.